Hey guys, welcome back to SMQB, AMA Sports Show's dedicated college football podcast here on this Saturday night, 10:03 p.m. We're not doing this one live because we have a lot of games to cover. There's going to be two parts to the SMQB for week 4, just because of how many things there are to talk about. You get to see the 8 games we're talking about in this particular episode. Um, Other games that we will be talking about for part 2. Kent State, Georgia. Georgia didn't look up to par as it usually has been this season. Um, Texas Tech upsetting Texas with a last-second field goal. I don't know, App State throwing a 28-3 lead. Michigan almost falling to Maryland. Plenty of games to talk about. Hence why we're doing this in 2 parts. But yeah, let's just hop into it. First game I think is worth mentioning is, well, the one on the top left. Let's go to Pullman, Washington first. In you know, as the resident Duck fan on AMA, this game was like a classic Duck heart attack for any Duck fan game where somehow, against what should have really been happening, uh, the Ducks win. The Ducks pulled it out. Um, and I think part of that really begins in the first half. The Ducks went into the half down 17-9, and the Ducks had 4 trips to the red zone, 3 of which ended in field goals, and 1 of which ended in a Bo Nix pick six. Um, while Bo Nix definitely picked it up in the second half, this game, it felt like there was perhaps some mistrust between Nix and his receivers or vice versa. That just hampered the Ducks from, closing out drives in the first half. Um, but I mean, at the end of the day, I think the Ducks deservedly won here. Washington State showed how good of a football team they are, um, especially at home. I think a game we should be looking forward to in the future is when they travel down to USC. We'll get to that when it comes to it. I think that's like 5 or 6 weeks from now, though, especially considering how poor USC was tonight. But we'll get to that. I mean, Oregon 624 yards of total offense. Um, and again, the Ducks' passing defense was shown to be not, I'm not going to say inept, but definitely not as good as its run defense. And conversely, it, Oregon's rush defense was just continued to show how good it's been. Um, I'd say the standout players from this game were Cameron Ward. Cameron Ward, Wazoo's quarterback. He might have ended the game with 2 picks, 2 touchdowns, just under 400 yards, but his ability to extend plays where he'd escape what should be a sack, and somehow the one play I'm thinking about is where he evades a sack, and as he's getting tackled to the ground, flicks it to, I think, Nakia Watson out of the backfield, and they get a first down off of it. It was like a third down play. Um, just he did what Wazoo needed to stay in that game. Um, and then another player I think of note on the Wazoo side is DeJohn Stribling, just their best receiver, I think. Um, Obviously got a touchdown for his efforts. Um, yeah, overall, I think Washington State put up a very valiant performance. I got my prediction here that Oregon was going to win but not cover. But I should also talk about what happened on Oregon's side. Um, Bo Nix, despite how his poor performance in the first half, I think there's no other way to put that, ended the game very well. Uh, I mean, he threw double the passes this week that he did last week, and I think the game script kind of led to that. 428 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. Um, Obviously, the interception was a pick six, and one of Cameron Ward's was a pick six, which I think's a bit unique. Um, Troy Franklin was great, 5 receptions for almost 150 yards. Um, but the thing that confused me with this game was how good Oregon's rushing offense was, yet how little, or I shouldn't say how little, how it just wasn't used to finish these drives in the first half. I mean, if you're putting up 178 yards of rushing on 32 rushes for just under 6 a carry, how is that not what you go to in the red zone? Red zone. I mean, Irving's putting up 7.4 a carry. Whittington put up 6.3 a carry. How are you just not going to hammer the ball home there? I mean, a win's a win, but um, I think of the words or like of a common Pullman saying. I think Washington State kind of cooged this one, even if the Ducks I think deservedly won this game. I still think the Cougars maybe should have. Um, if it wasn't for the 22 unanswered points in the fourth quarter and the relatively insane last 5 minutes of this game, um, I think the Cougars hold on and win that game. But final score: Oregon 44, Cougars 41. Um, I guess it's on to next week for both teams. I think Washington State should bounce back very well. Oregon, I think, has a trip to Stanford next week, and Wazoo has a trip. Are they tripping next week? No, they have Cal at home. Sorry, I just looked it up. Oh, and that USC game that they travel to is 2 weeks from now. We'll probably talk about that on the podcast. Anyways, that game's done. Next game, we're headed over to Neyland Stadium in Knoxville, Tennessee. Knoxville, I think? Yes. Where Tennessee break with tradition, and for the second time in the past 17 attempts, the Volunteers beat the Florida Gators. Perhaps not as convincingly as it really needed to be. I mean, Florida made that last chance scramble, recovers the onside kick, and I mean, if the pocket hadn't collapsed on the final Hail Mary attempt, um, maybe it could have been even more sketchy for Tennessee. But overall, I think both teams had very convincing offenses. Both of them had almost 600 yards of total offense. Turnover battle was even. But Florida's time of possession here, I think, is what kept them in this game, as well as Anthony Richardson, I should say. Anthony Richardson has kind of been up and down for these past 2 seasons. Certainly, injuries have a role in his sort of relative inconsistency, but he showed today that he's a great dual threat quarterback. 4 touchdowns and combined, 2 in the air, 2 on the ground, single pick. But outside of him, I mean, Florida's rush wasn't good. They didn't really have any ability to run the ball on the ground, whereas Tennessee was able to run when they wanted to run and however well they wanted to run. Hendon Hooker, another, I guess, dual threat quarterback in this case. 3 touchdowns, 2 through the air, 1 on the ground. Turnoverless as compared to Anthony Richardson. But I still think that this Tennessee team, despite a good win here against Florida at home and the good win against Pitt earlier in the season, they aren't blowing teams out. Obviously, they didn't cover in this game. I still don't understand why the line was at 10.5. But it was still a very entertaining game. I guess we'll see in the future how Tennessee develops. Florida's hopes, I guess, in the SEC East are kind of, or if there even was any hope with how well Georgia's been playing, apart from today, pretty much done now. And I think it's fair to say that their performance last week against USF was definitely an anomaly. they've shown that they can beat teams like Utah. So I think both teams will, Tennessee will probably continue its stride. Obviously, it has a difficult next couple weeks going to LSU, then having Bama at home before a, like a fix-up game following it. Also, it's their bye week next week before going to LSU. Um, but really good game. Game day was there. Josh Pate was there, and I think it was definitely an entertaining one. Definitely not the most entertaining game this week, though. That game would go to the one we're going to talk about now, which is Clemson Wake Forest double overtime. Clemson wins 51-45. I was less confident in. I thought Clemson was going to win. I've got all my predictions that we've talked about so far correct. And I was less confident in how well Wake Forest was going to do in this game, admittedly. Everyone was saying that this was an upset chance. It certainly ended up being one, but man, I apologize to the Demon Deacon fans out there for me underestimating their ability. Hartman, 6 touchdowns, a 6 touchdown game. I mean, what can you say about that? DJ Ualongale wasn't crazy by any stance, but I mean, 5 touchdowns, 0 picks. I mean, what are you gonna? I'm not gonna fault him for that at all. What can you fault? I mean, just overall, fantastic game to watch. If there's a couple games this week that are like must-watch highlights. This is one, and I don't even really know what to say much about this game. I mean, both defenses really struggled for stops. I mean, if the score line wasn't evident enough, I mean, I guess the defense for the Tigers came up when and ultimately did and sealed the game for them, breaking up Hartman's pass on like fourth down and double overtime. Um, yeah, I don't really have a lot to say about this game. I mean, just crazy game. Go watch it, or at least go watch the highlights. Um, but that leads us to our next game here. The first game of the predictions that I got wrong. Neutral site game in Arlington, Texas. Razorbacks against Texas A&M. A&M pulling off the upset against number 10, 23-21. Last week there were some concerns about Arkansas, on the basis of how they really waited until the fourth quarter to put Missouri State away. And obviously the Aggies have been plagued by, they haven't looked great this season. And their one loss on the record's to App State. And is that a fluke loss now? I mean, they've beat Miami, now they beat Arkansas. Just remains to be seen. Maybe this off. It's not even like the offense was crazy. Obviously, Max Johnson puts pretty much the same stat line that he put up last week against Miami. But the difference in this game was that Texas was able to run the ball. Which I went into this game not being it. I did not predict this. I mean, Devin Akane, I hope I'm not saying that last name wrong, put up like almost 9 yards a carry, and something that was like totally against what Arkansas has been able to do well this year. I went into this game saying Arkansas's pass defense is their weakness, and I don't think Texas A&M is going to be able to exploit it. Turns out, Texas A&M's ability to run is just what took this game. And, KJ Jefferson, he brought Arkansas back last time, or brought him back against Missouri State. And he did as much as he could this game. He looked great. Well, I'm not going to say great. but he was responsible for every Arkansas touchdown. Um, and Arkansas again was able to run the ball. It's just so similar to what happened last week against Miami, right? Um, Arkansas outperformed on offense, and the level of outperforming was different. Um, but conversely, the two things that I think this is, well, the one thing turnover, the one turnover Arkansas had, the fumble that was, obviously one of Texas A&M's touchdowns. Um, that was crazy. 82 yards. That's the type of defensive play you like to see. Um, but the thing that I think sets this game apart is that Texas A&M's run game was able to do something they haven't been able to do all season, which is not inherently be at the mercy of the other team. Time of possession for Texas A&M has been a big challenge of theirs throughout this season. And against Arkansas here, it was relatively even. I would have never been able to predict this going into the game. Um, but, they're able to hold their own. And, for Arkansas, this is definitely a pretty darn big setback. But this is not a time where they can get, not they can't they don't have a week to recover after this. They have Bama coming into Fayetteville next week, which is going to be a great game in its own right. And if they want to save this season for them, if they want a chance to make it to the SEC championship, it's a must-win next week. So there's no time to rue your mistakes or rue whatever poor performance you thought you had against Texas A&M. They're going to need to perform next week. And then on the other hand, Texas A&M, it seems like they're beginning to be able to right their ship. They've got a trip to Mississippi State next week, which isn't a terribly. Mississippi State's a great team, so I think it's going to be not a great team. They're a good team, and I think it's going to be a good game. But again, they also have Bama the week following. So, I don't know. It will really depend. I think both these teams have paths going forward in the SEC West. They just need to win out. And it's very hard to say that either of these teams will win out on the basis that it's the SEC West. It's the toughest division in college football for a reason. Let's go to another game where I got the prediction wrong. Funnily enough, the only other game I had a prediction wrong from our previous podcast. Minnesota against Michigan. Now, I thought Michigan would be in wounded animal mode after going to Washington and losing last week. And I thought that despite their offense not looking crazy against Washington, their defense was going to be enough, especially on the rushing side, to keep Michigan State in this game. And boy, was I wrong. Ibrahim, this is the first game in the past 16, past 17 now, that Michigan State's rush defense has allowed over 100 yards. Ibrahim only beats it by 3 yards, 103 and a touchdown. He's still the best running back in college football right now. But man, Michigan State's offense. I don't really know what's going on. It took the backup quarterback coming in after Peyton Thorne was benched on the last drive of the game to get a consolation touchdown. Shout out Noah Kim. I don't really know a lot about you, man, but you got Michigan State a touchdown. That's all I can really say about Michigan State, man. They didn't invest as much into their run game. as they did against Washington, um, but it was still wasn't good. Broussard did nothing. Berger did nothing. Um, Minnesota's rushing. I mean, I said Ibrahim. Ibrahim in of himself beat the Michigan State's rush defense streak, but I'm not even including Trey Potts or any of the other rushers from that game. Um, I mean, 240 yards on the ground. You're gonna break Michigan State by like almost 2.5 times what they've never allowed in the past 16 games. It's crazy, and it wasn't like Minnesota was only good on the ground. I mean, through the air, they're throwing for almost 270 yards. Tanner Morgan had 3 touchdowns. Um, Minnesota might be the sleeper team in the Big Ten West. I mean, going forward, who do they play next week? Minnesota's going, or not, they have Purdue at home. I'm going to chalk that up as a win. I don't want to count my chickens before they've hatched. Um, but Purdue hasn't been particularly convincing this season. I mean, their best performance was against Penn State. But since then, or I guess I'm not going to include the Indiana State drubbing. I mean, that's just expected of Purdue. But they didn't look great against FAU today, and they lost against Syracuse last week. Um, Minnesota's, I'm not going to say only, because that's kind of disrespectful to the other teams. Their main challenge for the rest of the season is going to Penn State on the 22nd of October. But outside of that, they have a relatively easy conference schedule. Um, Now, will they be able to go to Wisconsin and win on the road? Will they be able to beat Iowa? I don't know. But if there were a team to make it to the Big Ten championship, that's purely based on their easier schedule, I think it's Minnesota here. Michigan State, on the other hand, I think this pretty much just knocks them out of contention for a lot of things. They just need to sort their offense. And while they have Maryland next week, who looked really good against Michigan. Again, another game we'll talk about for episode 2 of Week 4. They just don't have easy games. You know, you got Maryland, you got Ohio State the week after that, you got Wisconsin the week after that, and then you finally have a bye week, and then you have Michigan after that. So they're gonna have to fix their offense on the run, and I don't know what that means for Michigan State and where they'll end up at the end of the season. Um, does this diminish Washington's win? I think it does a little bit, but nonetheless, I still think Washington deserves to be ranked. Um, their game, as of time of recording, isn't over against Stanford yet, but they have the ball. They're up 33-15. There's still a couple games going on, but most of them are, most of everything's over. I mean, the closest game right now, weirdly enough, is Wyoming having the ball against BYU and only being down 11 in the fourth. Yeah, anyways, continuing. Next game. The basketball game that happened this week. Kansas covering and beating Duke at home, 35-27. Man, Jalen Daniels, it's that man again. 4 touchdowns through the air, 1 on the ground, accounting for every single Kansas touchdown. I mean, this man is making a Heisman bid right now. They have Iowa State next week. They just lost to Baylor. That's the last game we'll talk about today. But man, this Kansas team, they're proving people wrong. I don't know. I don't want to get fully on the hype train because I don't know. I'm not fully sold. I don't like to just completely dive into things, but I must admit I like the story. I like the story. Like, what isn't there to like? This team hasn't won 3 games since 2009, and then suddenly they're 4-0. Um, and all of a sudden, the Big 12 isn't looking as formidable anymore. Well, I shouldn't say that. Obviously, Kansas State beat Oklahoma. That's what I'm referring to here. But and then obviously Texas Tech upset over Texas. This Big 12 is wide open. And if we get to November and this team is like even a one loss and sniffing the Big 12 Conference Championship, can you imagine them putting that in preview magazines before the season? Someone predicts that Kansas goes 4 and I don't. What was their over under win total? Kansas over under win total preseason. Sorry if you can hear the typing on my keyboard. I'm curious. 2.5. Well, aren't they proving people wrong? And isn't Jalen Daniels looking great? Next game I want to talk about is USC Oregon State. Caleb Williams was bad, and bad's being kind to him. Travis Dye was great. Um, Oregon State threw this game. Like, when I say threw, I mean Chance Nolan threw it to the other team um, by throwing 3 picks. Um, Oregon State had no right to have 4 turnovers compared to USC's 0 and only lose by 3. For the people who haven't seen the final score, USC 17, Oregon State 14. Um, I was obviously I picked USC here, but I really wanted Oregon State to win because no matter how much they're rivals with us here in Eugene, um, I dislike USC more. Um, um, Caleb, there's a lot of things to talk about. Well, Caleb Williams, people were calling him a Heisman candidate. Um, Instead, he just made USC look really exposable. It's not even like Oregon State's defense, which was good, even though it didn't force any turnovers and probably should have. Caleb Williams really should have had at least 2 picks. Also, I'm sorry, Chance Nolan had 4 picks. I thought it was 4, but it said 3 on ESPN until I opened up the box score even more. Caleb Williams was missing easy passes, like screen passes. He's throwing them in the dirt. He's, I don't know. I mean, obviously Oregon State's corners played well, but I think the problem's more than that. You can't have below a 50% completion percentage, and you know, always expect to win a game. Uh, they've got Arizona State next week at home, which I don't think is a worrisome game for them. But they have Wazoo the week after that. That's worrisome. Then they have Utah away after that. That's worrisome. Their offense has been looking great. Their defense has been forcing turnovers. And as long as that continues, if their defense is able to carry them the way they have been, then USC probably maybe is 1 loss this year. But Caleb Williams can't continue to perform the way he has been. I mean, Travis Dye, former Duck. I hated to see him leave. He averages 7 yards a carry in this game and scores a touchdown. I will talk about Oregon State a little bit. I hope Chance Nolan doesn't get like threats or some shit from this game. Because I really think Oregon State deserved to win this game. And they had every opportunity to, and they just kind of threw it. On the ground, they are able to just expose USC. And I think a Bo Nix level of quarterback or a lot of different quarterbacks, even though I think Chance Nolan is a good quarterback, he just had a bad day. A lot of quarterbacks are going to expose this USC team. Um, but time will tell. Time will tell. Um, I think USC's loss will probably. I had the hot take that they wouldn't win eight, or they'll win 8 games this year, so they're going to go 4-4 from now if that hot take proves true. Um, and if USC has this level of offense against any team that can put up points against no matter who, um, watch out because things are going to get ugly in SoCal. But now we had a number 7 team barely escape away from home. Let's talk about a number 6 team at home losing to Kansas State. The Wildcats bounce back following a loss against Tulane last week, which I think just it wasn't a good loss. It was at home. It just I think it was a wake-up call for Kansas State. They're like, we can't be losing games the way we did last week. Let's go prove some people wrong. And did they prove some people wrong? Dylan Gabriel. Oh, let's start with the losing team, Oklahoma. Dylan Gabriel, 4 touchdowns. He wasn't really the issue this week with Oklahoma. I mean, in fact, offensively, Oklahoma really didn't have any issues. 220 yards on the ground, 330 through the air. I mean, you're putting up 550 total yards. So where does the slack come, right? Well, it's the defense, I think. They weren't able to get pressure on Kansas State, really. Not like copious amounts of pressure. I mean, they didn't record a sack. But Adrian Martinez, being a dual threat quarterback, accounting for 5 touchdowns. What can I say? What can I say? Looked really good throughout the game. Just this is again another game kind of similar to Clemson Wake Forest. Obviously didn't go to overtime, but neither defense was particularly outstanding. I don't think Kansas State punted the entire game. I could be wrong about that. But I feel like I read that somewhere. Apologies for not having it up in front of me. Um, but Kansas State came out hot, and they were able to just keep pace with Oklahoma the rest of the time. And that's all that they needed to win. For Oklahoma, this is obviously a bad time to lose. If they win out, are they in the college football playoff? Maybe. I'd say those chances are a lot less likely now. So does this rule out any Big 12 team from making it? I don't know. I don't know. Obviously, there are some. I think there are a couple undefeated teams from the Big 12. Oklahoma State is the one I'm thinking of right now, and Kansas too. But this is definitely a damper in Oklahoma State's want to make it to a college football playoff again. And that'll lead us to our last game of the day. Obviously, again, I'll reiterate that more games will be talked about next episode. I won't. I'm probably not going to film it directly after this one because it is getting late. But I'll probably do it tomorrow. Maybe I'll do it on stream. I don't know. Last game, I don't even have it on the format because it didn't fit. It's Baylor, Iowa State. I got this game right, but I did say that Baylor wasn't going to cover. So I got that part wrong, technically. They did cover. I think the deciding factor in this game, obviously Baylor wins by 1 touchdown, 31-24. I think it comes down to Iowa State turning the ball over. I mean, two turnovers isn't horrible. It's not. But it was the deciding factor. Um, Especially when Iowa State going into this game had an 11-game home winning streak against Big 12 opponents. Um, Baylor, I think, learned from its loss at BYU about how to play on the road. I mean, their road record under Aranda is like 4-8 now, so it's not good, but they were able to get control of the game early, um, just from like a momentum point of view, and despite a little bit of a comeback towards the in the fourth quarter for Iowa State, they weren't able to pull it back. Um, I don't. Okay. Uh, Beyond that, I think Baylor's rush defense was really good. I mean, Iowa State, the majority of their plays um, were rushing on offense, and they were only able to get 66 yards of total rushing offense. Um, Michigan State against Washington style performance here. I mean, Jarrell Brock, he looked fine, but I think it was Hunter Decker's not being able to exercise his dual threat side of him that was um, a problem for Iowa State. I mean, Jalen Knoll was also crazy for them at wide receiver. That doesn't really need that much of an introduction, though. I mean, 120 yards receiving is crazy. Blake Sherpin for Baylor, though, had a pretty good games, you know, under center, 3 touchdowns, 230 yards. Baylor wasn't wowing anyone offensively, um, but offense did what it needed to do. Defense did as well. But that wraps up the first half of games we're going to be talking about. Make sure to tune in later in the week for like the second half of games because there's certainly plenty to talk about. We might even wait to do the second half of our week 4 reactions until after the AP poll comes out because we'll probably talk about that then. Thank you guys for watching. If you're new around here, subscribe to the channel. Make sure to check out the channels of me as well as Mike and AGB that are in the highlighted channel section of the YouTube page. Thank you again so much. This has been SMQB signing off 10:40 p.m. Pacific time on Saturday. So maybe this will actually be a Sunday morning quarterback. Take care.